John Boyega tries to do the right thing in Detroit. Will Arnett does the squirrel thing in The Nut Job 2. Idris Elba does the gunslinger thing in The Dark Tower. Jeremy Renner does the hunter thing in Wind River. And Annabelle does her creepy doll thing in Annabelle Creation. That's all on this edition of Movies with Mark. Hi, I'm Mark McPherson, movie critic for Moviespoon.com and TwinCitiesGeek.com, and today I'll be taking a look at 5 movies that are currently playing in theaters right now. Well, our first film is Annabelle Creation, a prequel to 2014's Annabelle, which was in itself a spin-off of The Conjuring, which follows the origins of the creepy doll Annabelle. Well, the thing is, for me, dolls have never really been that scary of a horror icon. I mean, they're small, they're fragile, you can kick them, you can throw them, you can toss them, you can outrun them, and all of that. They don't really seem as scary. And I think the filmmakers know that with Annabelle Creation, and that they make everything around Annabelle as scary as possible, rather than just make the doll itself scary. Because the doll, even for as creepy as they try to make it with the big eyes and the blush and the very creepy looking face, it's really not that scary. Everything around Annabelle, however, is very scary, or at least for this film, at least more interesting and more thrilling and more fun to follow than the actual, the actual exploits of the doll. It's like, oh, what does the doll do? Oh, it turns its head, it's somewhere, then it's not. Oh, it kind of floats a little bit, but that's really all it does. Thankfully, there is a lot of cool stuff here. The film follows a collective of orphan girls who come to live in the home of a toy maker who once made the Annabelle doll, but he lost his little girl years ago, and now her soul is inside the doll, more or less. And now the daughter's soul needs, like, other souls, or a human body, or a vessel, or whatever. It doesn't matter. All you need to know is that Annabelle is possessed by a creepy little girl, and now this girl wants to haunt and terrorize these orphan girls that are now in her home, and it leads to all sorts of kind of ridiculous frights, but also kind of fun aspects. I mean, like, they set the mood right. They focus more on making the house like kind of like a very creepy setting of like dark corridors and doors that slam and all that. Very, very classic horror fright stuff. And it's actually kind of fun. I mean, it's not like terrifying. I mean, especially like in this age when we have films like The Babadook and It Follows and It Comes at Night, horror films that really get under your skin. Annabelle won't really do that. Annabelle will more or less just give you a ride, as most typical horror films will. But for being a ride, it's actually pretty fun. It actually has some fun frights. It's pretty neat to follow. Some of the little girls here are actually, they're not just like screaming victims in the night. Some of them are actually very determined and make smart moves, and they're very plucky, and you want to see them make it out of this alive. It's actually pretty fun. I mean, it tries to come full circle with the whole Annabelle thing, which I don't think it does too well, especially how towards the end of the film they introduce another version of Annabelle, which turns out to be the real version of Annabelle, which is an old Raggedy Ann doll, which they bring into the picture. Like, oh no, is there going to be like, the real Annabelle versus the fake Annabelle? Is there going to be like Annabelle versus Annabelle in the next film? Oh, who knows? Who knows at this rate with the big Conjuring universe going on right now? As I said, I had fun with the film as sort of a ride. It didn't really give me any terrifying frights. I mean, it relies quite a bit on jump scares, and there are a few that are just kind of, like false jump scares. But most of the time, like, there's a higher percentage of jump scares that actually lead to something frightening, as opposed to just, oh, somebody grabs her shoulder, like, from behind us, which is how they say hello. It's like, really? We still got to do stuff like that? But for what it is, I'm not expecting much with, like, a creepy doll movie. There's only so much you can do with it. And there's actually some cool frights here with, a possessed little girl who's trying to kill all the other little girls. This black demon with teeth that's like going around the house, and its eyes glow in the dark when it's lurking in the shadows and stuff like that. There's some stuff that kind of doesn't make sense. Like at one point, the little girl possesses or at least the demon possesses a scarecrow in a barn, and it leads to a very ridiculous sequence where, in order to scare a little girl into the darkness, the ghost starts unscrewing light bulbs. Like, wouldn't you rather make those light bulbs explode? Why isn't there's a very ridiculous scene where, in order to escape the scarecrow and like stay in the light, this little girl's like racing against time to screw back in a light bulb while the ghost is turning it the other way. It's like, oh my goodness. And she's up on a ladder too, and it's probably going to lead Just some really horrible jokes about, you know, how many victims of Annabelle does it take to screw in a light bulb. This film won't really give you any frights or scares or stuff like that, unless of course you are definitely afraid of like too many jump scares or creepy dolls or just your thing. But I still had quite a bit of fun with it. So Annabelle Creation, I'm going to give it 3 stars. Our next film is Wind River, a mystery that takes place in the snowy hills in which a woman is found dead out in the snow and barefoot after having ran several miles. What was she doing out there? Well, that's what a hunter, an FBI agent, and the police are trying to figure out. Jeremy Renner plays a local hunter to the area who is first called in to track some lions, but later discovers the body and is brought in on this case as sort of, you know, a hunter or tracker, and he kind of like stays off in the distance and, you know, just in case something might go south, and it will go south, where guns are drawn and as this mystery is peeled back. Elizabeth Olsen is called in as an FBI agent, who's, you know, not quite used to the area. When she comes there, she's not really dressed for the big snowstorm that comes through. But you feel for her, and she does bring a lot of passion into this case. Most of the film takes place on a Native American reservation, and there are some notable Native American actors here, including Gil Birmingham, who you might remember from Hell or High Water, and Graham Greene, who you might remember from Dances with Wolves. He gets in a lot of great lines here as the comic relief of the local police force on the reservation. The film was written and directed by Taylor Sheridan, who previously wrote on Denis Villeneuve's Sicario, and he brings a lot of style to this film. He has a great atmosphere. I love how he uses the large snowy setting here, and he has this very atmospheric music playing to it. When he gets into action here, it's very, you know, quick and intense and bloody and brutal. I just wish the writing was a little bit better here, because there's a lot of dialogue. Some of the dialogue, it shifts between being great and just being you know, kind of like passive, like, you know, it's like straight out of a book, trying to have like more poignant lines that don't come across as heavy as they should here. That being said, you know, I did have a lot of fun with this film. But I wish I think it could have been so much more than that too, especially because it feels a little bit uneven in tone, and it kind of has like this kind of Fargo vibe to it, where it's kind of sort of silly, and we embrace sort of, you know, like the desolate murder that's going on out in the snowy hills, and how a storm comes through, and it has this very, you know, rustic charm to it. And you know, the characters are really great here. I do like the action here. I just think that, you know, I don't know, part of me thought that there could have been a little bit more here than just a big bloody shootout at the end, especially because it goes full-on Western by the end, by just having Jeremy Renner play this sort of like badass cowboy who finally gets in, you know, the revenge that we want to see happen for this woman who ran out into the cold and died who didn't have to. Wind River is a stirring thriller that sort of becomes more of a crowd pleaser towards the end, but I still had quite a bit of fun with it, and I think audiences are actually going to really like seeing Jeremy Renner play this sort of badass cowboy, and I think a lot of people are going to like the cinematography here. I think they'll like the mystery and the procedural cop drama going on here. I just wish the writing was just a little bit better, just so I could love this film so much more, because the dialogue, it just, especially for Taylor Sheridan, who did such a great job on Sicario, I wanted the characters to be just a little bit more here. Feels like there's a little bit more depth that should have been explored here. That being said, very fun film. I think if you go see it, you'll have a great time. So for Wind River, 3 stars. Our next film is The Dark Tower, based on Stephen King's fantasy novels, and I can already tell that, you know, there are going to be quite a few fans of the books that are not going to dig on this movie, because it goes pretty fast here for being a 90-minute film and doesn't really slow down to explain much of its magic or its world or what the Dark Tower is or how it interacts with our own world. But you know what? I don't care. I am perfectly fine with them not slowing down to explain any of this magic stuff, because I think the film works best when it's not slowing down, when it's not trying to explain all this stuff, because it is pretty ridiculous when you think about it. I mean, let's think about this. Let's lay the groundwork here. So essentially what's happening here is there's another dimension on top of our own. There's a dark tower that protects this kind of like post-apocalyptic world from like some outside dark force or whatever. And the only thing that can bring the tower down is the power of the screams of children, which Matthew McConaughey plays this sorcerer known as the Man in Black, whose harvesting the screams of children to shoot at the tower and destroy it. And the only one who can stop him is Idris Elba, who's the last of the cowboy gunslingers, who wields a pistol that was forged from the sword of Excalibur that can shoot ricocheting bullets at him. I mean, and to go along with that, we have a Tom Taylor playing this kid who has visions of like the Man in Black in this other world and seeing the gunslinger, and then it seems like they're just dreams, but then guess what? The dreams are reality, and he's got to team up with Idris Elba to shoot ricochet bullets at Matthew McConaughey. It's such a ridiculous concept, but that's actually why I like it so much. I mean, it's so ridiculous. It feels like those 80s action and fantasy films that were daring and trying to find something cool and crazy to do, and not all of it works, but I gotta admire the audacity of it. I mean, think about this, like, years from now, there's probably gonna be somebody who's gonna remember this film as like, oh, what was The Dark Tower about? Oh yeah, it was that really ridiculous film where Idris Elba shot ricocheting bullets off of Matthew McConaughey, who was like catching them like pebbles and then flicking them back and forth. Oh my goodness, like they're... And I mean, the way that I'm describing this film, it sounds like it's so bad that it's good. But it's actually kind of like an adorable film for what it's trying to be here. It has some grand ideas. It doesn't slow down too much to explain the Dark Tower and how it, how it clashes with our own world. How our own world is having earthquakes because of the Dark Tower, and how there are portals that go back and forth, and how, oh, I forgot to mention, Tom Taylor's character of the kid actually has a psychic power that's uncreatively referred to as the Shine, which apparently, like, it doesn't give him the power to like, throw objects or stuff like that, but he can telepathically communicate with people and somehow open portals to the Dark Tower world. I mean, it's all pretty ridiculous, but it's like a light bit of fantasy. I do like the scene with the fish out of water aspect when Idris Elba is brought into Tom Taylor's world, and he's all amused by New York City. And there's a great scene where he's watching television and he sees a commercial with computer animated talking raccoons, and he's like, "Oh, do the animals still speak in your world?" And he's like, "Oh, no, it's just a commercial." Wait, what do you mean still? And it's like, and if the film were like 2.5 hours, it would have stopped, and like Elba would have kind of explained like, "Oh, there was a time in our world when animals spoke and everything," and Tom Taylor would just be like, "Oh, okay." And I would have been like that too, because it's just like, yeah, I don't need to slow down and explain stuff. It's like, okay, there's a tower, it's got to be destroyed, evil's gonna come in, children's screams can destroy it, and a gunslinger can stop a wizard. Like that's all I need to know. It doesn't really take off at some points. Most of the humor isn't that great here. There's a lot of action scenes that are very ridiculous and become cartoonish at times. But for the few moments where it does work, where it does become very ridiculous and out there with its premise, I actually kind of dug. So The Dark Tower gets 3 stars. Our next film is Kathryn Bigelow's Detroit, the racial drama that takes place during the 1960 riots in the titular city, but mostly focuses on the incident at the Algiers Motel, in which a bunch of black men lost their lives due to police brutality. The film is divided into 3 acts. The first act, we get to see, we get to see what's going on in the police station, in the streets of Detroit. We get an idea and a feel for the era. The second act takes place almost entirely in the Algiers Motel, where we experience, what went on during the investigation, and how like police brutality came into play here, and trying to piece together like how this all happened. And then the third act is just a courtroom drama of, the results of what happened from that incident. And I think that the weakest act, is the second act that takes place in the motel, because you can tell that Bigelow is trying to fill in the gaps of this story, mostly with with the police being more racist and being more brutal towards these black men, and then just, creating this sort of like horror aspect to it. And it feels like, for a film that's supposed to be about, the racial tensions of the era and trying to focus on this crime, it feels like it's trying to be too much of like a horror film, especially when they have that typical trope of, when you're trapped in a building inside a horror film where you try to escape and you get to the basement, but you just end up right back where you started again. And it's like, that feels like something that would be better suited for like a horror film, kind of like, akin to something like Don't Breathe. But here, it feels a little out of place here. It feels like there should be more than just, like these little filler sections of, of trying to like fill in the gaps of this investigation. You know, that being said, you know, I understand what Bigelow's trying to go for here. I understand that she wants to place us in that scenario where we can't escape, where we're stuck here, and it just gets more intense and brutal. But we stay there so long that I think it makes you numb to one point. It just, like, you know, all the violence and all the racism, it just reaches a point where you're just drained of it. It's just it makes you so numb. And maybe that was the intent. Maybe Bigelow wants to get us to the point where we're almost like desensitized towards it, where we want to kind of feel like uncomfortable and sick with ourselves that we feel that way. But I think I thought there was something more here to explore in this case, as opposed to just, you know, the fact that, yes, these cops were racist and they were evil and they were brutal here. But how much more is there? Like, you know, what more do we know? And I mean, we get to know a little bit more about the suspects that are involved, and like, because like the cops come here because they think there's sniper fire going on here. Turns out it was just like a starter pistol that was going off there. But I don't know. I think that there should have been some more. There should have been more here, and it feels like there wasn't. Like they had enough information about this case, but seemed to be focusing more on staging the events rather than the characters that we follow here. There are some strong performances here. John Boyega plays a black security guard who's brought into the Algiers motel incident, and he's doing his best to try to find some middle ground here, trying to work with the police and trying to work with the suspects and trying to make it sure that everyone makes it out of the night alive, but he's not quite sure that he can get to that point. And Will Porter, who plays the racist cop at the center of this incident here, he's great at playing a villain here. I mean, I don't want to insult the actor, but he has like a face that's just made to be a villain. I mean, you know, you look at him and he just looks like he's got sinister thoughts going through his head here. There's also some great performance by Algie Smith and Jacob Lattimore, who play two members of a Motown group who are caught in the Algiers incident. And Anthony Mackie shows up here as a black veteran who's also caught up in this incident as well. Although, you know, for as much as I like Anthony Mackie, he's not really given that many scenes here, and you kind of wish there were here, because he kind of feels a little bit more like Boyega, where, you know, he's trying to find some middle ground here and trying to, you know, remain calm, even though he really can't. And of course, like, much like how like Boyega will change, there will also be another character who thinks like, you know, well, you know, the cops are just doing their job, and then they'll be brutalized, and then they'll have a much different opinion about white people after that point. Detroit has its moments of brilliance. I mean, it does a great job depicting the era. But I still think there's so much more that could be explored here, or it wasn't explored deep enough. And especially, like, because you have so many great actors that are assembled for this project, and it doesn't feel like they're quite used as well, with the exception of Boyega and Porter, who are used quite well. I wouldn't be surprised if they end up nominated for Academy Awards here. But I guess, you know, I felt uncomfortable watching this film for not feeling more uncomfortable about the situation, because eventually at the halfway point, I kind of felt like the violence and the racism just kind of plateaued, and we're just kind of like, you know, kind of like a broken record. We're just kind of repeating ourselves, and I don't want it to be that. I want this to be a more biting statement about both the Algiers Motel and like racial tensions, which we could really use during this era. So I think the film kind of missed the mark there, but I still think because of the performances and the atmosphere that it establishes, it's a very strong film. So for that, I'm going to give Detroit 3 stars. Well, let's end the show on a lighter note by reviewing The Nut Job 2, Nutty by Nature, the sequel to the 2014 cheap animated film. And to be fair, this sequel, it does actually kind of improve over the last film. There's no convoluted plot about squirrels trying to steal nuts from this secret mafia operation of a nut shop. There's nothing that complex here. It's a very simple story of a very fat and evil mayor who wants to take over the park from the squirrels and the wildlife and turn it into his own theme park, and the animals have to stop him. It's a fairly simple story. The humor is juvenile here. There's no fart jokes, but there is a scene where one dog has to puke and the other dog has to eat it. There is, like, the gags here really don't work. Most of it's just slapstick, and then there's lots of explosions and chases that go on here, which aren't really that exciting. One aspect of the film I actually did kind of dig was Jackie Chan plays this kung fu mouse who led his brethren, you know, out of a park that was turned into a golf course, and they ended up coming to a Chinese part of town, and they ended up studying Jackie Chan films. Yeah, the Jackie Chan. I was watching Jackie Chan films, and he becomes inspired by Jackie Chan to sort of turn his mouse brethren into this sort of like kung fu fighting force. You know, it seems like something out of like Kung Fu Panda, but it's actually kind of neat. Well, especially since Jackie Chan did a voice in Kung Fu Panda. But it's actually kind of neat here. I wish there was more of this, because we only get maybe 2 particular sections of the film that focus on Jackie Chan's character, and they're promoting this character heavily in the ads. It's like, he should have been the main focus. I would have been absolutely fine if like we just took out like the whole evil mirror plot and just brought in the evil rodents trying to like start a war with the squirrels. That would have been a much more fun film. But, you know, as it stands, you know, it's just, it's you know, it's not a horrible animated film, but it's so passive. And none of the gags hit here. None of the drama works here. Most of like Will Arnett's comedy in this is just, you know, sort of, you know, pointing out the obvious of just like oh, how's the mayor gonna destroy our park with that tiny little shovel? And she's like, oh, the shovel was a symbolic gesture. It's actually, you know, gonna signal bigger construction. It's like, yeah, okay, yeah, we get the joke here. There's nothing in this film that I really laughed at. I mean, I got a few small smiles out of it, but the humor here, it feels like it's geared towards kids, but without any like real smarts or anything that clever that's going on here. So yeah, The Nut Job 2, it's not a good movie, but, you know, at the same time, you know, there's nothing that's really all that offensive or appalling or as confusing as like The Nut Job here. I think, you know, it kind of improves over the last film, but there's nothing really here that you gotta run out and go see it as like, oh, they finally improved The Nut Job. No, they just kind of made a few tweaks to make it a little bit more bearable. So, The Nut Job, I'm going to give it 1.5 stars.